As a content moderator, you see the worst of humanity. BlackSky moderators are Black, moderating anti-Black content. So it's pretty intense. Day one, it was pretty intense, but it was just 10 reports. At a peak last week, it was 1,000 reports. That takes a lot of time.
Hello, welcome to the devtools-fm podcast. This is a podcast about developer tools and people who make them. I'm Andrew, and this is my co-host, Justin.
Hey everyone, we're really excited to have Rudy Fraser join us today. Rudy, you're the creator of BlackSky, and I'm incredibly excited to talk about that. But before we dive in, would you mind telling our audience a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah, first off, thanks for having me. Really appreciate it. I'm Rudy. I'm a native New Yorker, born and raised. BlackSky's kind of been a side project that has really taken off, but during my day job at the moment has been like enterprise Salesforce consulting. So like as a technical architect. And yeah, I've been working on BlackSky for about 1.5 years now, and it has been super fulfilling. I view it as an extension of the community building kind of work that I do. So I also am a mutual aid organizer in New York. So I also want to give a little nod to We the People NYC. They inspire me constantly and in the work I do.
Sweet. So let's take it from a really high level, because a lot of people probably don't know what BlackSky is and don't really know that like BlueSky can enable this sort of like community within a community on its platform. So like from a really high level, what is BlackSky and why did you create it?
Yeah, so I would say BlackSky is two things. It's firstly like a community. So it's a community of the Black users on the BlueSky app. And kind of separately, I refer to as like BlackSky algorithms, which is kind of the team behind it and creating the tools that enable BlackSky to exist. And those tools are an ATProto implementation, specifically called Risky, which enables us to build community. Kind of the TLDR is that trying to enable community building on decentralized apps, particularly centering like marginalized communities. And that usually ends up meaning building in safety tools for them, because you're building, App Protocol, for folks who don't know, is a decentralized social media protocol that, at least thus far, has prioritized public conversations. There's plans in the future to have private accounts, private posts. Some parts of it are like DMs are private, but they're still like a centralized piece, so they're not really a part of the protocol per se yet. But so everything's really public. And so when you're doing something like public, like a BlackSky, that just comes with harassment. And so a key thing that I had to build in from the very beginning almost has been safety tools.
So other social networks really don't give us like the levers to pull to even like build in safety tools. So like there was Black Twitter, but Black Twitter is really just a bunch of people on Twitter that happen to be in the same area talking to each other. Like what tools does BlueSky give us to like moderate that community?
Yeah. And so I would even say that like BlueSky has like a couple things that it allows for, but a lot of stuff that has kept BlackSky safe has kind of just been like hacking on top of that. But the core pieces that BlackSky has been leveraging so far has been custom feeds. It was one of the first custom feeds launched before even custom feeds were available in the BlueSky app. And that's what was, so with custom feeds, the way I would think of it for folks who are not familiar with BlueSky is BlueSky is like if multiple companies were building the same social media app. And so each different part, when you go into BlueSky and you load up the custom feeds, those feeds could all be they're all built by different people. Some are built by BlueSky themselves. Some are built using feed builder tools that developers enable to allow other people to create feeds without needing the technical knowledge to do that. And some feeds are like BlackSky, which I built from scratch. And so that's like one component. And there's like kind of like a philosophy that went into why I thought custom feeds would be good for building a community like BlackSky, because there's like a bit of some people, the first thing people often ask after they maybe understand about BlueSky is like, why not ActivityPub or like Mastodon for building that similar community? And, barrier to entry aside, like I think one of the things is like discoverability. Uh, what Black Twitter had was it was a Black community in a very that was very visible, but still had built up its own defense mechanisms over time that were very like the individual basis. And so people actually brought a lot of those like practices over. But with BlackSky, it allowed me to, having like observed how Black Twitter operated and some of the issues it faced, just proactively build some of those things into how the feeds work. The other component that BlueSky has is composable moderation. So you're not stuck with just BlueSky's out of the box. Like you don't have to rely on just the BlueSky core moderators. You're able to choose who moderates content for you. And that could mean labeling content, hiding it. There's different protocol nuances of how much a moderator can do and take action on. But that's been a big sell for BlackSky as well, that we're able to offer context-aware content moderation for particularly protecting against anti-Black harassment and misogynoir, which is the intersection between misogyny and anti-Black harassment. And we're able to do that faster than BlueSky is able to. They recently made a post that they got like 40,000 moderation reports like in a day, the other day, I think. And for the context, they had like maybe, I think, what was it, like 300K in all of 2023. And so, I mean, we're all seeing that. Like there's just been lots of different factors that have led to it, but we've all had to kind of scale up our defense mechanisms a bit. But yeah, so for Black users, they're finding that like BlackSky, where maybe another moderator may not take an action because they're unsure, they're unclear if this would be harassment, we're able to be pretty decisive on almost everything that comes across our desk. And we've so far been able to do it faster than like BlueSky would be able to, again, because they're dealing with a backlog of 40,000. We're dealing with a smaller subset of that. And yeah, there's this stackable approach to moderation too. So we're able to like interweave things that I think that's a piece that like is less understood by a lot of folks. But to give an example, people are able to report content to BlackSky, and it's not just stuff where like it would be labeled as anti-Black harassment. It could be that someone is spamming the BlackSky feed. And so I've kind of directed people to subscribe to the labeler service, report this content of something that shouldn't be in the feed. Or it could be someone's being a troll. It could be that like this is a toxic conversation that's happening, and they're able to also use the in-app reporting to do that really conveniently, and we're able to handle it in a scalable way using the same like moderation, like create different moderation queues. So like this is a queue of stuff that needs to be removed from the feed. This is a queue of stuff that is maybe needs to be labeled. Maybe this is like so vile content that this whole account needs to be put on a block list so that people can automatically block it. There's some stuff that we've built that prevent certain people from even viewing the feed. And so that's like that was more of a hack. That's not like a thing that no one else has really done that. But that goes back to the philosophy of like, okay, we're going to build this very publicly, because there's this kind of cultural expectation or a question that people ask of like, who all gonna be there, which is just like wanting to know who you're going to be in community with before you join a community. Again, goes back to the tension with discoverability and like a activity pub. So you're able to see the community before you start engaging with it. But because of that, harassment, the stuff's still a vector of harassment, because people who don't belong or who would be a threat to that community can also see that content. But as soon as they show their hand, basically, and are discovered as being abusive or whatever the case may be, there's the in-app reporting that can get triggered. There's proactive automation that we could trigger for identifying certain things as well. And then this was actually kind of a hack that people made to, if your feed is down, you usually just see a generic message of pipe through network error because the upstream service is broken. And so some people kind of made a clever way to just show like a post. So it's a human readable error message. I took that and said like, okay, what if I could put people on like a ban list and then show that error message instead of showing the content that the feed would normally show? So that's like another one. We call that banned from TV. So if, there's all these different things that can be triggered. You can get labeled as anti-Black harassment. You can get put on the green list, so people who subscribe can auto block you. You can get banned from viewing the feed so that you're not able to keep using it to find people. And it can really like isolate and stop harm, especially since we can't take down accounts ourselves. So yeah, none of that is possible with like any other platform.
Yeah, that's a lot of clever tooling usage. I especially like the matching user accounts on the feed and just giving them like a custom post that is like an error message. I imagine that wasn't necessarily intended, but it's like a very clever usage of the tools that you have available to you.
And really quick, that's because you can build personalized feeds, right? Like if you wanted to make a For You algorithm, you'd have to know who the user was, so you know what likes they have. So when every request to your feed is like proxied through BlueSky, but it comes along with your which called your DID. So it's like your unique identifier on the network. And so then we could say like this DID is not allowed to view this content.
We'd like to stop and thank our sponsor for the week, Mux. Mux is an awesome platform that makes adding video to your product as seamless as can be. They handle everything from uploads, hosting, streaming, and even playback. They've got everything you need to build a comprehensive video product. And where that gets really interesting is with analytics. Analytics are something you add at the end, and then you have to constantly futz with and fiddle with to get that important information to your stakeholders. But with Mux, they have an amazing treasure trove of data that lets you gain insights on how your viewers are viewing your videos. They recently announced that they're opening up the floodgates, and instead of just retaining 35 days of data, you get a full 100. You can see how your users have been using your videos for 3 full months. That's pretty cool. And it didn't stop there. They added a whole bunch of new metrics also. You can view the average playtime and the average completed time. You can even drill down into the details and see where people dropped off your videos to gauge whether your content is engaging or not. Pretty cool, pretty powerful, and super useful if you're running a business. So if you want to get started with Mux, head over to mux.com right now. And with that, let's get back to the episode.
So to support all this, you have a few different like software components. So you mentioned the labeler earlier. You have the feed. What are you actually having to run to sort of like maintain this, and like what does that require?
Yeah, there's the experimental stuff, and then there is the kind of core bread and butter. So the custom feed, you need 2 things. You need a Firehose consumer. So BlueSky has this publicly accessible, locked open Firehose that is sending, at this point, gigabytes of data over on a daily basis through the network that hundreds of folks are subscribed to and listened for every like, post, follow, profile update, image upload on the network. And then what you want to do is you want to filter that down to the content that you want to store in your custom feed. Otherwise, it would be an enormous amount of data. So I have a Firehose consumer that listens for everything on the network. Has been really scalable so far. And then it sends over to, people do this a little differently. It's all up to you how you want to design it. Some people use the Firehose consumer save straight down to the database. I send over to basically have a feed gen server that does 2 things. It both like receives messages from the Firehose consumer and then saves that down to the database. And it also serves up the posts from the database in response to like feed generator requests. So when you view BlackSky trending, that's all a server. And I keep them separate because, especially like another example of that was like, I'm able to like, with this big spike in traffic, like the Firehose consumer has done pretty fine on its own, but I actually had to scale the feed gen horizontally in response to all the traffic that came in. I mentioned off recording, but like the Tyson fight was a big night for BlackSky. It was coming right on the heels of a big wave of Black Twitter users migrating over. And then it was just a big cultural event. And so it was the first time the feed ever had 1 million views in a single day. And that broke a lot of things. But that's when I was able to, okay, like the Firehose consumer is fine. Like, that's on some good hardware. But the feed gen, like, I need to separate this out because I was finding that, which is, again, dealing with scale has been a learning curve for me, of like the server is responding slowly all of a sudden. Like, what do I do about that? Is it that I need to like scale it vertically? Like, do I pay more for this individual server? Do I scale it horizontally? And figuring all that out on the fly while it's breaking, and people are talking about me because it's breaking. And so that's the other tricky thing with the network is like you get. I think like the startup advice is like talk to your users. My users are always talking to me, and and it's funny because Netflix was glitching out during the Tyson fight, and so people were posting like it actually made me feel better because it said Netflix was struggling more than the BlackSky feed. But yeah, so the feed gen, the Firehose consumer, and so it's a couple things. So I've built a custom app protocol implementation in Rust, so that's risky. So the Firehose consumer is risky Firehose. The feed gen is risky feed gen. There's another component that's more experimental that I'm working with that we can get into. That's like been the most difficult to build and most complex and all the things, but I felt was very important. And I feel for the long-term vision I have with BlackSky, which is the PDS, which you can basically think of the backend half of a social media app. But what I run from like just out of the box BlueSky is their Ozone instance. So that's the labeler service. That's where you can log in and have like a moderation queue, and you could add moderators to help you out with stuff, and then you could like label the content. So that I don't have a custom version of that. That's just out of the box. Ozone. And then I have a bunch of scripts that do like a bunch of Python scripts that do different like jobs of like removing like a auto mod script that removes content from the feed based on certain rules. I've just basically just like 100 SQL queries that like remove Wordle posts, remove sensitive topics, remove posts that have like 20 hashtags in them. There's stuff that like there's, obviously again, since messages are coming through the Firehose, it's doing some decision making there of like this person included this hashtag, so include this post in the feed. This person added themselves as a member, and it tracks membership in the back end on the database. Also Postgres, that's the other thing, obviously. So that's tracking some content. And then there's like there's some protections that are built in there because we found like, once threats evolve over time. We didn't really have to worry at a certain point, when BlackSky was like 200 users posting in the feed, 10,000 people viewing it. There wasn't people trying to like use the like N-word and like post using the BlackSky hashtag, but like that happened around the time of the million views, and it was very public, and someone was like, this shouldn't have happened. And I know how quickly first of all, I can empathize with like feeling maybe like a bit of betrayal of like, y'all said this was a safe space, why am I seeing this? And then I can understand the like, this shouldn't even come through the feed. So responded to that and basically put in some slur filters to not even, no matter what your content matches, it won't even make it into the database at that point, stuff like that. But then there's like retroactive stuff as well, that are deleting stuff. And then like Ozone, I won't be too hard on Ozone. It is very bare bones, and I've submitted a lot of issues to the GitHub, and I should work on some myself, but it's just been really hectic lately. But like Ozone doesn't email you when you get like a new moderation like report, and I mentioned off camera, like we went from getting, when I launched the Ozone instance, I knew if I launched an Ozone instance, it would blow up. I knew people would use it. I know that like there would be content to report, and it was crazy content right off the bat. It's really moderation. People underappreciate content moderation so much. You, as a content moderator, you see the worst of humanity. And BlackSky moderators are Black, so, and dealing with like moderating anti-Black content. So it's pretty intense. Day one, it was pretty intense, but it was just 10 reports. At a peak last week, it was 1,000 reports. And that takes a lot of time. And so you don't get notifications by default with Ozone. I think the BlueSky team, they have like they use Slack for their moderators. And so they have like a Slack bot built in Go. But so I just made like a quick Python script that like sends email notifications, gives context to the team of like, this post is showing up in the feed or it's not, here's the comment, here's the person's username, etc. So different little tools like that are all there. And like I mentioned, like the backend. So using Postgres, a couple read-only replicas now, and a primary node. I was gonna say all hosted on DigitalOcean because I got into the DigitalOcean startup catch program. So wherever I can get free credits.
Yeah, that's kind of what I wanted to talk about next, is that like when from the outside looking in, not having created a feed at first, I kind of assumed the shape of it would be a lot different. Like in general, when I use an API for something, it's like an API and I like say, hey, BlueSky, give me some posts. The setup of a custom feed is like, as you said, kind of completely different. It's just a server. It just listens to the fire hose and like chooses to store things or not. How do you think that's going to scale? Because like even right now, we're not like the biggest network and it still costs money. Like, do you foresee it being a problem as the network grows, having to kind of like host all of your own infrastructure for it?
Yeah, I would say so. I agree. It's not obvious that you're not relying on BlueSky to like serve up the posts, which is why that like people underestimate that like custom feeds are two things. One, and what's been really cool with the migration of users. I've like I'm not used to being in the public eye very much, and I went from like having the biggest following on for any network was like 1,000 followers to now like 30,000, and I still have yet to like introduce myself to people or like explain like the project or anything. But the users, like I think they've done a good job of teaching each other about this. And what's been really cool is like the mainstream adoption of decentralized technology is like people are learning about it and then explaining to each other. So someone made this really good thread from BlackSky. It was just like, hey, custom feeds are basically their own app. Like you view it inside the BlueSky app, but they're their own app. And I was like, I didn't think people would get that if I explained it that way. But they did, and they're like, yeah, so you can do whatever you want with it, you know. That leaves a lot of creativity and freedom to design what you want to do. You know, I think an interesting thing was like, you know, with custom feeds, like you get agency. So how do you make an engaging custom feed, right? Like that's one thing. And like there's no like out of the box, like here, I think the Twitter algorithm is like insanely complicated. But just like, yeah, how do you choose? Do you go off likes? Do you go off like other interactions? Do you add weighting to it? Do you add like age of the post? Do you want to surface posts that are not getting as many likes, but they could be potentially interesting to people? Do you add personalization that this person doesn't, you know, this is maybe a really popular political post, but the person may not like politics or want to see that right now? None of that exists today. So people create feeds and they're like I think the technical infrastructure is a question, but the reality is, I guess I go back to where I was talking about, where I was like, no one tells you how to deal with scale. They just kind of tell you probably won't get to scale where it would be a problem. A majority of the 50,000 custom feeds on BlueSky are not being used. So as long as they kind of work for the like couple people who are using them, it's probably fine. But if you want to make a really popular one that gets a lot of usage, and like that's where you start to like have to figure things out as it goes, and there's not really the bootstrapping of how do you get it to popularity, right? You don't really even, let's say you want to make a custom feed and you're like, I don't want to learn how to be a dev per se, but I want to make a custom feed, and then I want to promote that feed, and I want people to get really engaged with it, and I want to build a community around it, whatever idea or topic, because people did that very early on. The game dev feeds or 3D printing feeds or anything like that. And then it's like, okay, maybe you figured out how to include your topic or your community, but have you figured out do you even have the tools to make the algorithm interesting to people and like choose what that means for you particularly? For me, it was like, how do we keep it interesting, but also keep it safe? Because it could easily be corrupted, but not everyone's going to have that consideration. But yeah, I think more about that. And so BlueSky, I've seen them talk about this, where it is like they think that one of the devs mentioned that he doesn't think custom feeds are optimal right now. I think Threads recently launched custom feeds to kind of copy, I mean, literally copy what BlueSky has done. And I think there's some people who like respect what they built and how the ease of use of it. For me, I'm like, ease of use, but not really, is it actually gonna, it could never produce a BlackSky. So I'm just kind of like, I don't know. It's not really for me. But I do think that there is room for tools that allow people to create engaging feeds and build communities around. And then I ultimately think it'll be like a service that does that for people. And that will need to figure out its funding and monetization or otherwise, whether it's, and I think, so that's something that's been interesting. I went to, early this year, I went to this really interesting, that's really stuck with me, this decentralized social media workshop at Princeton. Shout out to Nathan Schneider. He was who got me in there at the last minute. But it was like Noster people, Activity Pub folks, me and Brian Newbold, who's like a core BlueSky person. We were the only BlueSky folks holding it down for ATProto. And like one of the, for like, it was an unconference, and like one of the things that my table talked about at one point was like, how do you actually fund all this? You know, some folks in Noster have gotten big money to run their stuff. You know, Farcaster, which wasn't at the, no one from Farcaster was there, but they got like what, 180 million or something crazy like that. You know, BlueSky themselves, people always come for them, but they're like VC funded. You got the Social Web Foundation, they're like nonprofit. But you know, with BlackSky, for me, I was just like, I want to build something engaging and interesting, but I'm like, I'm not gonna go broke doing it, you know. And it's like I go back to, again, like mutual aid organizing. It's like, it's supposed to be, if it's for the community, like I don't want to, here's the thing, I'm going to give it away for free and like give it back to the community. But I don't also want, unlike a charity, like I'm not trying to just, you know, have the burden be on me. Like we all got to take a piece of this and make this work. So from the early days, like BlackSky was the first project to be, BlackSky is fiscally hosted by a nonprofit as of right now, open source collective. And so all of our funding and stuff is transparent over there. So it's been donation focused, but honestly, like the donations only recently started spiking. What I think people are donating for is like, they appreciate the work and the stuff that I built, and there's been a bunch of more usage and stuff. But and at least for me personally, like I want that money to go to moderators, because I believe in paying for content moderation, because it's terrible work, like I mentioned. And most like Reddit mods do that for free. You know, I think we should be able to have community moderators to get paid, kind of point blank period. The technical stuff and all that, that's something I'm trying to figure out separately, but there are opportunities. So I think I'm also probably one of the first feeds to like do something like a sponsored post. There was all these conversations about advertising, and the consensus has always been like, advertising isn't even possible on the network. And I disagree with that, because anything is possible if you just like, where there's a will, there's a way. You can hack something together. And I don't think that like, I think it kind of depends on what you advertise. But long story short, I was just like, I want to get us past the conversation of, can we do this, to should we do this? So the way that I did that was like, I have like, when you view the BlackSky feed, any of the feeds now, and even I've started like hosting feeds for other people, randomly about like 0.1% of the time, a sponsored post will pop up in the feed, and it'll be for a donation to BlackSky. And I think that's like people may not want ads, but I'm like, what if you just did it like that? Like what if the advertising business is impressions that lead to like people paying for something to another company? Why can't it just be like, hey, you're using this social media product that I built, ship in every once in a while. And like, it's in your face, like as you're using it. So that was kind of a thought process. I'm sure people will come up with other creative things. There's someone who's built a co-op, who I founded a co-op for their app protocol projects. Once upon a time, there was a project who got into Y Combinator. They ended up pivoting shortly after. But yeah, I think there's going to be interesting business models that come with app protocol, because there's also like an openness to experiment with that, and an understanding that like we have to find some way to sustain it all. And what that will be, I think we'll see how it all shakes out.
This is such a reoccurring theme that we have on our podcast. We talk a lot about like open source sustainability. How do people who work on open source tools or trying to build a business around them make money on that? It's interesting. I was at a unconference myself in LA several weeks ago for an independent research conference. It's like Ink and Switch, and basically people in the HCI space who are not necessarily academic, but who are doing like computer science research. And funding was another conversation that came up. It's like, how do we make this effort sustainable? So a lot of parallels between what we're talking about here and what I'm hearing in other communities. And I think your approach to this is really interesting, is like thinking like creatively about how you can use the technology to sort of like self-sustain it. What is your sort of long-term plan here? I mean, do you want to turn this into a business or a nonprofit, or like how are you thinking about like the organization around the technology? Because I mean, at some point, like scale does hit you, and stuff does get expensive, and
Yeah. For me, the way I think of it is like, I want to just work on BlackSky full time. Like I want to get to that point. Like it's the thing that I spent so much time thinking about all the different problems and where it can go. And like, I also like, I feel like there's been so much kind of hate and doubt that has happened. I mean, it happens with like any publicly visible project, both for like BlackSky and like ATProto itself. Then like, I kind of just want to like prove some people wrong and like build something that people really fall in love with. And that's already kind of happening. And so it's like, that's working. So, and that's with me doing it part-time, late nights. I have 2 hours. I'm on 2 hours of sleep right now. This on my second world's strongest cup of coffee. And but yeah, I would like to be able to get some rest and be able to work on things. It's been interesting. Like, for the longest, I got like, I dealt with lots of like rejection for like larger funding. And so that's where I like leaned more into the grassroots. I'm like, if no one understands the thing that I'm building, the users understand. So, let's see if they can support. And that's been cool. Like that's gotten up to, I think right now that's around the estimated Open Collective shows like an estimated annual budget. That's like 30,000, 35,000 right now. But I'm like, I feel like that, I want that to like cover the moderators, basically. And I can see the moderation queue as the network scales, that scaling. So as of right now, I'm kind of thinking of it there. But the other thing was the growth and the attention has been like, there's been angel investors who have reached out. So I'm starting to have those conversations. And I think there's a world where I get to just like work on the tooling behind, like stay working in the tooling and then building for like other devs and try to find sustainability there, and then keep the BlackSky community aspect, like that be its own thing that's not corrupted by any kind of funding that would come through. But there's a bunch of devs in the ecosystem. There is no tooling. We're all doing this from scratch, learning everything the hard way each time. And so that's something I'm kind of like looking forward to.
Yeah, the sponsored post idea seems really interesting to me. I feel like BlueSky as a service and a protocol will start need to like having things where you can like say, oh, this is an ad. Cause like having a feed with a bunch of ads in it and you don't know they're ads seems wrong. So I do hope they add something there. But as you said, I could see big businesses happening around just like curating and putting feeds out there. It's a very new frontier.
Yeah. And then if people like really are like, the thing is like it has the opt out, like lots of ways to opt out, right? So if someone's making a feed that maybe was popular and then there's ads in it, like maybe if you don't even like maybe you're a dev and you don't like that I built BlackSky and I started putting these like donation posts in it. The code's open source, so like you could just fork it, remove the sponsored post piece, or you could literally like run it yourself. Like it's an environment variable to like turn off the sponsored post. So like you could, I think as long as people continue building that practice as well as like giving people freedom of choice and like a way to opt out, then at a protocol level, I think we won't run into like the platform decay problem and like the race to the bottom. I think that there are lots of mechanisms that prevent that kind of thing from happening. But I do agree that like probably like I can see fandoms trying to like create feeds for the fandoms very easily. That's kind of already happening. I don't know where I stand on brand accounts. If someone like adds their like Black-owned business into the BlackSky feed, then I'm pretty chill about that. But I'm very wary of like anything else. It was actually like Hawaiian Punch has an account and is doing the like, quippy, dunk posts on people that are funny, but I'm just like, I don't know that I want like I remember when Threads launched and it was just like brand accounts talking to brand accounts. I just think that's like, I don't know, it gives me the ick. But I do think, yeah, there's lots of new opportunities. Because the other thing too is like, because it's an open protocol, you don't even need to build a whole separate app, like something a hacky thing, or a thing I think is cool is like, all right, so I blog about my work with BlackSky often, and something that someone built was like, you could make a blog post on your blog, and then you could post the link to that as a BlueSky post, and then you could put a component on your blog so that as people reply to the BlueSky post, the replies show up on the blog page. And so from there, it's like when you just think about the different ways the content is just easily available. The content is just an open API. There's a fire hose. You could do all these crafty things. So I'm curious to see how people start incorporating the content from the network in other places that are not just like within the app. And obviously we haven't even talked about like other people, like people have built other apps. There's like Front Page. That's like I think that's like the Reddit kind of for ATProto. Someone made a link in bio kind of app. There's Smoke Signal that's like RSVPs. And so, yeah, there's all those things that are being built all without people having to create new accounts, and they can take their identity with them. Something I think of with BlackSky is like you can take your community with you, because we're all like, you're not creating new accounts and stuff. But then like, I don't know, maybe Netflix starts pulling in content like on a live stream or something, as like, or Spotify recently launched like, I got invited to like a Lil Uzi Vert listening party that was like, I don't even know if he was in there. Like he spoke, but like it could have easily been like a pre-recorded thing, because he just said one or two things and then had like dropped a couple emojis in the chat, but it was just the music playing. But they could also easily just pull that as like, that could just have been a custom feed on the side, pulling from BlueSky, and it would be really easy to do. So yeah, there's lots of possibilities.
This is all like super exciting, especially like the sort of like ingenuity of all the tooling that you've built for BlackSky, Andrew, all the stuff that you've done for BlueSky. Like there's this really interesting tooling. And the one question that it begs is how does BlueSky, the company, maintain itself? And then is there risk to these communities based on BlueSky's actual financial risk? So one of the questions that we sort of were thinking with you is like, what do you think about the life of BlackSky or this community sort of like outside of BlueSky, the company? Do you think like the ATProto lives beyond them, or is it like, what does that look like?
Yeah. Well, so that's why that's kind of why I wanted to build, there's a couple reasons why I wanted to build Risky, which is that I want to build an alternative app protocol implementation for various different reasons. Again, I think Risky is probably one of the most developed or like active projects that is trying to pursue that. So that's like a cool opportunity, especially since a lot of the pushback on app protocol is that it's just one company building the protocol. And, while that is true, like they accept like PRs to their core code base, but they are still like selective with it. They have rules around that. So I want to be able to build Risky and hold them accountable to building the protocol. And because if you only ever run their code, I don't really feel like you at least don't get the power, without arguing semantics about things. You're not getting the power of decentralization, because you're just going to always push whatever update that they have. And so you're just hosting a version of it, but you're not really, they could just still change the protocol at a whim to whatever they want it to be. So I want to be able to hold them accountable to a protocol, and be able to build that as an alternative. That also helps ensure the longevity of a community like BlackSky. I mean, today we probably, without me building all that, like we could probably just host all our own infrastructure and like have a separate running, like could host the front end client, like have like probably don't even need a relay, like just have a PDS in the front end client and have that just be disconnected from everybody. So like that's possible today. And then, well, the one that's like there's a couple of sticking points because there's stuff that they have not yet made available to the protocol, like DMs, like the video transcriptions, and DID PLC, which is the core identity service. That's all hosted by them. I think there's people building stuff to like export and backup stuff from the PLC directory, and the PLC directory that has like your keys, so yeah, like your cryptographic keys to control your account. So some people like trying to build that resiliency there. I would say like if it happened today, there's risk. That's how I've seen other people talk about it too. Like if BlueSky went bad today, that's risk. Uh, if they did it like a year from now, hopefully that's like lessened. And then I think a couple years out, we should see a lot of stuff play out. Like, do people have the funding to keep working on these things and like build the alternatives and like have the support to make that happen? And then like, I think the protocol is kind of a dream right now. And then the closer we can get to making that dream reality, then I think, then I think we're good. It just has to like last that long. And if they did run out of money kind of immediately, which I'd have a hard time imagining that happen, but if they did, like we could rebuild. And I think the community around BlackSky has been so far that like there would be a bunch of people who would come along for that ride. It would obviously cause disruption. People would fall off, but I yeah, I don't think it would be the end of it and like pack everything up and move on at that point.
I kind of find it funny that your plan to de-risk BlackSky is called risky. Uh, that's just a fun point. But you mentioned that you're like rebuilding all of that proto or all of those parts that they put in their TypeScript library. That's a big ask. You mentioned that one part of that has been particularly hard. Can you talk more about that?
Yeah. I mean, I like a challenge, and I've done all this with like as like while doing two consulting engagements on the side and all the other things that have happened, and like got married, like got arrested for protesting, like still made this all work. But yeah, but PDS was like 100,000 lines of code at this point. So again, once again, like large amount of contributions to making that work. And it's still like there's still some kinks to work out. But I think that also kind of like shows the that it's not impossible, and like for me it's like it's engaging. I wasn't like I've seen people throw a couple little shots at like how I've like written the code. Again, first time open source. I never really wrote code in Rust before, but I just like the Rust programming language. So I used it as the opportunity of like I'll just do both. I'll like learn app protocol, build app protocol, learn Rust, build it in Rust, and been having a good time doing that. But yeah, the PDS is complicated. So the PDS is the personal data server. It is analogous to an instance in ActivityPub for folks that are familiar, but it is different. So once upon a time, the easiest way to explain it is like once upon a time, like the PDS was kind of the core backend component. Like people talk about the relay now and how that's centralized and stuff. The PDS was at one point the app was just the PDS and a front end client, and everyone was on one PDS. Then they added a bunch of different abstractions like layers in between that, and then they added the relay and stuff. But at its core piece, like the PDS is the backend server. So it hosts your account, your password. It hosts this like important piece called your repository. And it's like a GitHub repository, but it has this like fairly complex data structure. I'm again, like I mentioned, like a more of a hacky, like not like a staff engineer or like senior engineer by any means. And so I never really worked with tree like data structures before. And I hate recursion from the bottom of my heart. But yeah, so the Merkle search tree has like both of those, but it's this like computer science concept that they like took from a white paper and implemented, that it's supposed to be able to kind of maintain its like speed and be able to be consistently updated with like for a pretty like large amount of data, essentially. And within that, like there's already those components, and then it uses CBOR to do like its encoding. So there's pointers in the tree that are like CBOR encodings of the data. So it's like, yeah, I think I'm explaining that right. So there's already taking this like theoretical concept, they've implemented it in TypeScript, translating that over to Rust. There's all the different libraries that don't really come across well. Someone explained to me too, like there's like a bunch of different CBOR libraries in Rust, but like they're all kind of old. And so that there's just trickiness with that. What else was challenging? The sequencer. So, these are like the sequencer plus the WebSocket stream. So you're also doing like WebSockets, which is like basically like the relay is the word is like slurping, but it's like it's consuming from your PDS. So when your PDS comes online, you turn on server, create an account, make a post. Internally, there's a sequencer that's listening for the events that are added to the database, and then and then it creates like a queue of those events. And then for anyone listening, it's going to like output those events based on the cursor that they provide. And there's like a window of how many, like if you allow like events from 72 hours ago, et cetera. But you as a consumer, if you could run your Firehose consumer straight from a PDS, right? The relay is like a convenience. So the relay is listening to all the PDSs on the network, essentially. But if you wanted, you could just consume from one PDS. And so the relay is just another consumer, essentially, but in mass. And so that was a tricky thing. I ran into all these deadlock problems, and there's just like new programming issues that I hadn't encountered before. Dealing with WebSockets, never used those before. There was just like efficiency, like even though I felt like I translated the code fairly decently over to Rust, it just didn't run the same for whatever reason. And so then trying to like identify and troubleshoot those problems. Then there's the protocol piece. So that's like something where the tooling that I'd like to build out. I think on ActivityPub and Mastodon, if you like want to build ActivityPub implementation, I think that's like a good way of describing that. You could build, there's like test suites that can say like, this is compliant with ActivityPub. There are no test suites for app protocol as of yet. So it was a lot of trial and error, seeing like, can I get the relay? Can I get the did PLC server to accept a signed did document? Did I sign the document correctly with the keys? Then like getting the relay to accept my messages. And like the relay is not like outputting like really great error messages or anything like that. So then I had to run the relay locally on my machine and like add deep like a bunch of print statements, but this is the way I did it. I added a bunch of print statements to see like what is coming through on its end and like what's its internal errors of why it's rejecting stuff. And I spent the most time I've ever spent looking at raw bytes and being like, oh, it didn't accept, the did PLC server did not accept my signed did document because the way SerDes serialized the the was that it didn't handle the nesting of it correctly, and I had to serialize it as a string and then serialize it to JSON and add a respect sort order like to the like crate as a feature, and that got the correct order of bytes, because I looked at it and I was like, what it's supposed to, and then I had like the core BlueSky thing running doing the same events, and then I looked at the bytes from both of them and they're the same numbers, they're just slightly like 5 of them are the wrong order, and like that was because of like the sort order. And so that was like one of those things where it's like it took me really long to figure out, and I don't know that there was an obvious tool to do that. I've like started to find little tools that help with some things like that, where like CBOR, it's like you do this encoding, but it has like this it's like this tagged bytes. So it has like, it starts with like the number 42. And I just found that like sometimes when you view the CBOR, or when you view like a pointer, basically there's different ways to represent it. You could represent it as the bytes, but like it's usually represented as a string format of it. And so like a hex string. And so like just choosing which of those you're actually passing and how you're supposed to interpret those, that was like again, another hard problem to like figure out, because there's not something that's just telling you, hey, this specific field that came through, like this is wrong, and that's why you're getting these errors. Yeah, and then there's some things that just aren't clear, like, with the Merkle search tree implementation, like does the pointer, there's like a field called outdated pointer. So one would expect that if you change the underlying data, it's okay that the pointer is outdated at a certain point. But when I tried to do their test scripts and I did my test scripts, I was finding that like it wasn't the expected result. And then I had to like force the pointer to update in certain pieces. And I'm like, I don't know if I did something wrong elsewhere and now I'm like compensating for the first error, or if I'm, or there's something else going on. So a lot of like non-obvious, and like being probably one of the only, at least at the time, was like the only person who was trying to build like a full PDS implementation and not just like pieces and components of it. It was a rough and lonely road. I spent a lot of time, like I would hit up the BlueSky devs themselves, which kind of plays back into like people saying like, oh, it's centralized, but it's like, I don't know, they designed it and we're trying to figure out, make it decentralized, but that means like I need to go back to them like, hey, like why am I encountering this? Or like, yeah. And like sometimes I thought things were a problem and they weren't a problem. And it's like, then there was stuff that's specific to their implementation. So all of these things, that was what made it tricky. New technology, new libraries, me being new to certain concepts, like fundamental programming problems. And then like you're trying to build in an ecosystem that's a protocol. So like you need things to be compliant with the protocol, and there's no like compliance testing. So you just have to like try. At least for me, it was like learning things the hard way.
Yeah, that sounds like a lot. You've bitten off a big chunk of complexity, and props for using Rust to do it. Like Rust is not an easy language to just build anything in to begin with, but doing this and figuring out the PDS and like, working on the protocol and like trying to get all that to work, that's fantastic. And the community will be better for it, which is also one of the things that I'm excited about by BlueSky in general. It's like these efforts hopefully will like build. So the work you're doing here is going to help someone else, and hopefully like all comes back together. As we're wrapping up, we always like to ask a future-facing question. And for you, there's a few different ways that we could go with this. There's obviously the work that you're doing around BlackSky, both the community and the technology that enables the community. There's sort of like the features that you still want to tackle coming up to sort of continue to improve the community, and maybe like what the future of this space is in general. So I'm gonna just leave that with you and let you pick up on the thread that you think would be most interesting to talk about.
Yeah, I would say like something that I'll answer kind of all three, I guess. One thing that I'd like to tackle, probably that feels more urgent than the PDS, but I just started the PDS, so I like want to finish it before I pick up anything else. There was tons of stuff in the news recently of how BlueSky struggled overall with the network traffic. So like it was super frustrating these last weeks where it was like, people were like, Rudy, is it your feed that's down? Or is it like all of BlueSky that's down? And like sometimes it was me, and it was like, okay, like now I got to figure out the scaling. Like the Tyson fight, that was me. Other days it wasn't. Other days it was like intermittent issues with just the BlueSky app view. I think one of the times it was like a underwater like internet cable got cut. It was just like there were just so many things going wrong in all different, literally every different part of the stack and the network. But then like one of the ones that happened that had to meet, like we literally all had to shut down like our Firehose consumers, was the relay. Jazz from the BlueSky team, they have like done so I mentioned like the relay produces like gigabytes of bandwidth daily, and multiply that by the 250 people doing like consuming the Firehose. Like BlueSky's relay is like responsible for like outputting terabytes of data daily, and it's also archiving a lot of the data. And so there's like a bunch of like there's like heavy like disk operations, I think, that they end up going through and like burning through their servers. At a certain point, so Jazz launched Jetstream, which is with the Firehose. Again, this is like authenticated transfer protocol. Like there's So there, it comes with verifiable, all the posts that come, all the records that come through are verifiable because it brings through the whole Merkle search tree, all the blocks from it. And so if you wanted to, you could verify every single thing that comes through the network. And that's the intention of it. Most people consuming the Firehose don't need that per se, because they philosophically trust BlueSky, right? And they really just trying to hack on like a hobby custom feed. And so they just want to like get the posts or whatever the case may be. And so Jazz launched Jetstream, which allows people to like consume the Firehose with just JSON, and it's much lighter. And so it's like 100 or some crazy number lower. BlueSky is trying to get people to use Jetstream, but in the process of trying to encourage folks to do that, like the relay just kind of like crapped out over these last couple of days. So they're trying to basically encourage people now, I think, to run their own relay. And so for me, I'd like to run my own relay. Especially if it's not like mine's wouldn't need to be archival, like it doesn't need to store posts. It would just be like another kind of like pipe of the data from the network. And it would allow BlackSky, like it used to be fun when like every other feed broke and like BlackSky was the only feed that worked. That always gave me a little bit of pride. And so I'd like to be able to like get that built in. So I'd probably work on some of those. I think there's like a tool called Rainbow is what they're like a splitter that they're working on. So there's that. I think the other piece that you had mentioned was for the space. I think just a lot more companies and people building stuff. Hopefully, I'd like to see more front end apps. There's stuff I wanted to, before this big traffic wave, I was gonna like work on like a little front end app that was gonna be like a Pinterest for app protocol. But like, yeah, more of those like creative things. I think we'd probably see more connection between activity. I mean, hopefully, I feel like it's like a lot of just interpersonal conflict, I feel like, between the communities. But I'm like a part of like IFTS, the Federated Trust and Safety org. I think like knowledge sharing amongst like like I've met with moderators from like Reddit and Discord, like communities. And like, I think that knowledge sharing is really important to keep the whole internet safe. It's like, we should know like what are the threats that are happening. I'm actually wearing like a shirt from my friends who have this project called Open Measures, that like they provide like analytics tools for researchers to track stuff on the open web, to like for trends for like white supremacist campaigns or like QAnon or stuff like that. They could like choose what keywords and stuff and like be able to have visualizations to be able to understand those threats. I think all those kinds of like that kind of intelligence is going to be super important so that none of these spaces become places where like extremism can start to thrive. I think that would be really cool for the internet. I feel like you had one other one, but maybe I missed it. But that's stuff I would want to build. That is where I think the space ends up. That's one part of the space I think that ends up growing more.
Well, that wraps it up for our questions this week. Thanks for coming on, Rudy. This was a very interesting dive into all the work that you're doing. It's super commendable how you've grown such a community while also rebuilding all of ATProto in a language that you didn't know before. So thanks for coming on and talking about it.
Oh, thanks for having me. Really appreciate y'all. This is dope.
Just to repeat what Andrew said, the work you're doing is awesome. The amount of time that you're doing it in is mind-blowing. You mentioned a few times, you're like, I'm not a staff engineer or somewhere. Well, you could be, because this is impressive. So thanks for all the work that you're doing. It makes the whole community better. And I'm excited to see what you do. Yeah.
Appreciate it, though. Thank you.